Story number 1. The Man in the Blue Vest. I spent 3 years working the overnight stock shift at a Walmart in southern Ohio, tucked away in a town where the most exciting thing that ever happened was a new slow cooker model arriving in the home goods section. Our nights were predictable, almost monotonous. The store closed at 11 p.m., the customers cleared out by 11:30, and by midnight the only people left inside were the night manager, a handful of stalkers, and the overnight maintenance crew. It was quiet, a little eerie at times, but never frightening, at least not until the fall of my second year. It was around September when people started whispering about the extra employee. The story always began the same way. Someone glimpsed a man wearing an old-style Walmart vest, one of those outdated blue ones with the big yellow Spark logo replaced years ago. He wasn't on schedule, he wasn't on payroll, he wasn't supposed to be there at all. The maintenance guy, Greg, swore he had seen the man pushing a cart through the paper goods aisle long after closing. But when he followed him around the corner, the aisle was empty. No man, no cart, no footsteps, just the faint smell of something metallic, like old pennies. We all laughed at Greg, teasing him about working too many double shifts, until the rest of us started seeing him too. I remember the first time vividly. It was around 2:15 a.m. on a Tuesday. I was breaking down boxes in aisle B12 when a figure stepped into view, slow and deliberate, as though he had been watching me for a while. He was tall, pasty, and wore that outdated vest with an ID badge, so faded the name was unreadable. He didn't say a word, just stared. I greeted him with a nervous, "Hey man," but he didn't react, didn't blink, didn't even breathe from what I could see. He simply turned and walked away, making absolutely no sound as he moved along the polished tile. I would have chalked the whole thing up to exhaustion if it hadn't been for my coworker, Sarah. About 20 minutes after my encounter, she approached me with wide, trembling eyes. She looked like she had sprinted across the store. "You saw him too, didn't you?" she asked. Her voice cracked in a way that made me feel instantly uneasy. When I admitted I had, she told me she'd spotted him near the cereal aisle, and something about him was disturbingly off. She described how he moved in jerky, unnatural motions, like someone pulling at a marionette puppet by tangled strings. His shoulders stayed completely rigid, while his head swiveled far too smoothly to look at her. She also noticed that his ID badge wasn't clipped to his vest. It was pinned directly into his skin, which she swore she saw shifting around the metal like soft clay. I thought she was exaggerating until she told me what happened next. When she tried calling out to him, "Sir, do you need help?" he didn't turn around. Instead, she said he phased behind one of the tall pallet stacks. Not walked, not ducked, just flickered out of existence and reappeared several feet away near the end of the aisle. We went to report the incident to our overnight manager, and that was the moment everything became real. Instead of brushing it off, he went ghost pale. He sat us down in the break room and closed the door before whispering, "You didn't just see a random guy, you saw Harold." He told us that Harold had been a long-time Walmart employee, a quiet older man beloved by everyone. About 10 years earlier, Harold suffered a heart attack in the back receiving area during his shift. He died before paramedics arrived, still wearing his vest. For years, night shift staff had reported seeing someone matching his description walking the aisles. Corporate always dismissed it as stress or hallucination. Hearing this, every hair on my body stood on edge. Suddenly, what we saw wasn't just creepy. It was impossible, unexplainable, and terrifyingly real. 2 nights later, the uneasiness that had settled over our team turned into outright dread. Around 3:30 a.m., the store grew unusually silent. Silence in a Walmart is never normal, not on a night shift. There are always sounds: cardboard being cut, forklifts humming, carts rattling, the constant whoosh of the vents overhead. But that night, everything fell dead still, like the entire building was holding its breath. Then the intercom crackled to life. Normally, the only people who touched it were management, and always in a clear, cheerful tone. But what we heard that night was something distorted, broken, like a voice fighting through static. Old to receiving. The voice was low and ragged, warped as if someone were speaking through a dying radio. Every one of us froze where we stood. Sarah screamed. The lights flickered once, dimmed, and then steadied. Our manager came sprinting from the front of the store, panic written all over his face. "Everyone to the registers. Now!" he shouted. As we gathered near the front, we realized someone was missing. Sarah. She had been assigned to seasonal items near the garden center, the coldest and darkest corner of the store at night. Before any of us could react, we heard a noise coming from the back. Not footsteps, dragging. Slow, heavy, dragging like someone pulling something across the floor. The manager grabbed a flashlight, and the rest of us followed him as we approached the garden center doors. The temperature dropped with every step, the air turning colder until we could see our breath. When we finally reached the aisle, where Sarah had been working, we found her crouched behind a shelf, shaking uncontrollably. Tears streaked down her face as she pointed toward the glass doors. "He walked through it," she whispered. "He didn't open it. He walked straight through the glass." Sarah wasn't the type to scare easily. She once chased a shoplifter out the front door with nothing but a broom. Seeing her curled up, shaking like a terrified child, immediately sent a surge of fear through all of us. The manager, Tom, tried to talk to her gently, but she kept repeating the same phrase in a numb, distant voice. He walked through the glass. Tom shined his flashlight toward the garden center doorway, and we all saw the impossible. The glass sliding doors, locked since closing time, were perfectly intact. Yet there on the other side, in the outdoor garden section, stood a man in an old Walmart vest, tall, thin, motionless, facing us. The cold in the air was so unnatural it made my eyes water. We watched as the figure tilted his head at an angle no living person could manage. A slow creak echoed through the space, not from the doors but from him, like old joints stiff from years of disuse. Then, without raising a hand, without touching anything, he stepped forward, straight through the locked glass. The surface rippled like water, bending around him before returning to perfect transparency. No cracks, no sound, no explanation. We all stumbled backward. Tom grabbed his radio and screamed for security, even though we all knew security clocked out hours ago. The figure stepped onto the tile floor, his feet not making a single noise, though the floor was spotless and usually squeaked under every shoe. He took one step, then another. His name badge, still unreadable, swung slightly as he moved, like he was walking through thick water. Tom's voice dropped to a whisper. "Don't run. Don't provoke it." But fear overpowered reason. One of the newer stalkers bolted for the front registers. The moment he took off, the figure snapped its head toward him, and the lights above aisle 17 popped in a violent burst. Something unseen, something fast, rushed past us like a freezing gust of wind, and the stalker's scream echoed through the entire store. We sprinted toward the sound, slipping on the polished tile as we rounded the corner into the main walkway. The stalker, his name was Bryson, was on the ground, clutching his leg as if something had sliced through it. He wasn't bleeding, but he was pale as a corpse, trembling uncontrollably. "He grabbed me," Bryson gasped. His hand, it was cold, it burned through my jeans. But his jeans weren't torn, they weren't even wrinkled. Tom knelt beside him and tried to pull him up, but Bryson recoiled violently. "Don't touch me, don't let him near me," he screamed, pointing behind us. We turned. The figure stood less than 10 feet away, closer than before, too close. He hadn't walked. None of us saw him move. He was just suddenly there, like the air had blinked and placed him right behind us. His vest was wet now, as though he'd been standing in rain that wasn't there. Droplets rolled down it, but evaporated before they touched the floor. His eyes, I swear they were empty. Not white, not glowing, not human, just voids. We had to get Bryson to the front door, but the figure blocked the path. Tom raised his flashlight and shined it directly at him. For a moment, the light seemed to go through the figure, casting no reflection, no shadow, nothing. "Back up," Tom whispered. "Everyone back up slowly." We moved in unison, dragging Bryson with us as we retreated toward the registers. The figure remained still at first, until the overhead speaker crackled alive again. "Har, old, clean, up, in, Receiving. The voice was no longer distorted. It was clear, too clear, and it was coming from right behind the figure, like a recording being played through the walls. Suddenly, all the lights in the receiving area at the far end of the store flickered on at once. The figure turned sharply, as if responding to the call, and then he began walking toward the back of the store, slow, steady, purposeful, ignoring all of us completely. We didn't follow him. Not at first. We were too shaken, too stunned by what we had witnessed. Tom ordered us to stay put while he grabbed the store's emergency phone, an old landline mounted near the service desk, and dialed corporate security. But the phone didn't even ring. It emitted the same distorted static that had burst through the intercom minutes before. Tom slammed the receiver down, his face twisted with fear. "Everyone stay together," he said. "Nobody wanders off. Nobody goes alone." Bryson was still trembling, his hands locked around his leg. When we tried moving him again, he screamed in agony, saying the cold had burrowed into his bones. We were debating whether to attempt carrying him when Sarah said the 5 words none of us wanted to hear. "He's going to receiving." The store layout made that even worse. Receiving was the darkest, loneliest part of the building, the place where trucks unloaded overnight. It was full of towering shelves, narrow aisles, blind corners, and rows of massive pallets. Anything could be hiding there, even something not alive. Tom tried to radio the maintenance worker, who usually cleaned receiving, but again, nothing but static answered. That's when we heard the noise, a sharp clattering echoing from the back of the store, metal on metal, something being dragged across the warehouse floor, once, twice, 3 times. "We can't just leave him wandering back there," Tom said finally, though every word trembled. "We need to make sure he's not hurting anyone." None of us volunteered, but none of us refused either. We all slowly made our way toward receiving, pushing a wheeled chair for Bryson, so he wouldn't have to walk. The deeper we went into the store, the colder it became. The hum of the vents faded. Even the faint background buzz of electricity seemed to die off. And then, right as we crossed into the receiving area, the dragging sound stopped. Receiving was pitch black except for the flickering fluorescent lights hanging crookedly above the loading docks. The air smelled like old cardboard and diesel fuel, but beneath it was something else, something sharp and metallic, like blood that had dried long ago. Tom motioned for us to stay quiet as we crept forward between 2 towering pallet racks. Every shadow looked like it was breathing. Every creak of the metal shelves sent a jolt of fear up my spine. We stopped when we reached the far end of the room, near the huge roll-up door, where trucks backed in to unload. That's when we saw him, Harold, standing perfectly still beside a pallet jack. It took us a moment to realize why his posture seemed so strange. He wasn't facing us. He was facing the wall, his head tilted toward it like he was listening to something within the cinder block. Tom whispered, "Harold?" as though addressing a living coworker. Harold didn't move, didn't react. Then, suddenly, he lifted one arm. His hand twitched and jerked as if the joints were rusted shut. He pressed his palm against the wall and dragged it down slowly. The sound that came from it wasn't normal, skin-on-concrete friction. It screeched like metal dragging across metal, a piercing shriek that made us all cover our ears. But the worst part, the part that made my stomach twist, was that Harold's hand left no mark on the wall. Instead, the wall seemed to ripple under his touch, like the surface of water. Something was behind it, something trying to push through. We were rooted in place, too terrified to run. Suddenly, Harold turned around, not in a natural movement, but a glitching, stuttering jerk, like frames skipping in a corrupted video. His void-like eyes locked onto us, and the pallet jack beside him rolled forward on its own. Not fast, but with deliberate, steady force, as if being pushed by invisible hands. Tom whispered, "Back up," slowly. But it was too late. The lights above us began to crackle. One by one, they started exploding down the aisle, showering sparks as darkness chased us. We ran blindly, pushing the chair with Bryson in it, dodging falling glass as we sprinted through the aisles. Flames briefly flickered from the shattered bulbs overhead, then died, plunging receiving into nearly total darkness. The moment we reached the main floor of the store, the temperature shifted, just slightly. but enough that the cold grip on our lungs loosened. We didn't stop running until we reached the front registers again. Bryson was almost unconscious, mumbling about hands pulling at him. Tom slammed his fist against the locked front doors, trying to force them open, but the automatic system was completely unresponsive. Even the emergency push bars refused to budge. We were trapped, out of breath, terrified, and with no way to call for help. Tom grabbed the store's emergency key and tried unlocking the side fire exits, but each time he approached one, the intercom hissed to life. Associates are not allowed in restricted areas. The voice was no longer distorted. It was calm, human, but it wasn't anyone who worked there. We all stared upward as the speakers clicked off with a soft pop. "He's controlling the building," Sarah whispered, and for once, nobody corrected her. Then we heard it. Footsteps, slow, soft, coming from somewhere in the aisles behind us, not echoing, not distant, close, getting closer. Tom pointed toward the staff break room. "Everyone inside, now." We piled into the room, all 7 of us, dragging Bryson along. Tom locked the door behind us and shoved a vending machine in front of it. The room smelled of burnt coffee and microwave noodles, but tonight it felt like a safe haven, or the closest thing to one. For several minutes, none of us spoke. Then, faintly from the other side of the door, came the sound that haunted my nightmares for months afterward. A gentle knocking. 3 taps, perfectly spaced. Perfectly. We froze. Nobody breathed. The knocking stopped, replaced by a long, stretching silence that made the air feel thick in our lungs. Tom motioned for everyone to stay away from the door, but Bryson, barely conscious, whispered, "He's here," in a weak, fading voice. A moment later, the intercom crackled on again, this time inside the break room itself. "Associates," the voice crooned, "return to your stations." The room's lights dimmed. The microwave turned itself on, its display flickering. The vending machines rattled like something was banging on the inside. I was standing nearest to the back wall when I noticed something happening at the corner of the ceiling panel. A thin, dark liquid was dripping through the tiles. At first I thought it was old water from a broken pipe, until the smell hit, metallic, sharp, exactly like the scent that haunted receiving. Tom dragged a table beneath the vent and climbed onto it. He pushed the ceiling tile aside with a broom handle, and immediately flinched back as something thumped against the support beams above. "He's in the ceiling?" Sarah whispered, horrified. Tom didn't answer. Another thump shook the beams. Dust rained down over us. Then, slowly, something began crawling along the metal grid above the tiles. We could hear its weight shifting, too heavy to be an animal, but too soft to be a person walking. It moved like something slithering, something dragging itself forward with long, deliberate motions. Suddenly, the entire ceiling above the door bowed downward, as though something massive was pressing against it. The fluorescent light flickered violently. We backed away from the door, huddled against the far wall, as cracks began forming across the ceiling tiles near the hinge. "It's coming in," one of the stalkers whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Oh God, it's coming in." And then the knocking started again, this time from inside the ceiling. Tom grabbed the only object in the room that might serve as a weapon, the metal coffee pot, while the rest of us pressed against the opposite wall. The ceiling bulged, groaning under the weight of whatever was crawling above it. Then the intercom hissed a final time, louder and clearer than ever. "Associates, clock out." The words were followed by a grinding metallic noise, like gears forcing themselves into motion. The break room door, despite being locked and barricaded, began to creak open from the top corner, bending as if the metal itself were softening. Tom yelled at us to go through the emergency door in the back of the break room, the one that led into the manager's office hallway. We shoved it open, pushing Bryson out first, and sprinted down the narrow corridor. The moment the last of us crossed the threshold, the break room lights went out completely, plunging everything behind us into blackness. Then came the sound, one I will never forget as long as I live. The door behind us shattered outward, bursting like paper as something forced its way into the hallway. We ran with every ounce of strength we had left, hearing the scraping of something dragging behind us, fast, uneven, unnatural. When we slammed through the double doors that led to the front of the store again, the automatic doors finally triggered. They slid open with a cheerful chime, as though nothing had happened. We spilled out into the parking lot, gasping for air. The moment the last of us exited, the store's lights shut off all at once. Every window went dark. Every sign flickered out. And the intercom, audible even from inside the locked building, whispered one final time, "Good night, Harold." Police arrived minutes later, but they found nothing unusual inside. No broken light fixtures, no shattered ceiling tiles, no signs of forced entry, no evidence of anything wrong at all. They called it shared hysteria. We called it survival. I quit 2 weeks later. Bryson never walked the same again, and sometimes, late at night, I swear I still hear that intercom voice whisper through my walls. Story number 2. The Man in Aisle 23. I worked at Walmart for almost 6 years, mostly overnight shifts, and I can tell you this with complete honesty. If something terrible happens in a store, it's almost always late at night. The customers who wander in after midnight are a different breed entirely. Some are harmlessly weird, some are unpredictable, and some are the kind of people who make you pray for daylight. This story happened in 2019 during a quiet Thursday shift. We weren't busy, just the usual late-night drifters and insomniacs. I was stocking cosmetics in aisle 23, the makeup section, where the tall glass shelves made the whole aisle feel narrower than it really was. Around 1:45 a.m., I saw someone enter the aisle from the corner of my eye. That wasn't unusual. Cosmetics stayed weirdly busy at night for reasons I never understood. But something felt wrong before I even turned my head. A weight in the air, a pressure. When I looked up, I saw a man standing perfectly still at the opposite end of the aisle. Not browsing, not shopping, just standing, staring at me. He was tall, wearing a faded gray hoodie, and jeans that were wet around the ankles like he'd walked through mud, or something worse. His face was obscured by the shadow of the hood, but I could clearly see his mouth, and he was smiling. Not a friendly smile. Not a, "Hi, I need help" smile. A stretched, unnatural grin that didn't match his eyes that didn't blink. I straightened up, trying to sound calm as I asked, "Can I help you find something?" He didn't answer. He just took one slow step toward me, then another, and another. Each footstep made no sound. I backed up slowly, gripping my box cutter in my pocket. Then he suddenly stopped and whispered, so soft I almost missed it, "I know you." My stomach twisted, because I had never seen that man before in my life. My first instinct was that he was confusing me with someone else. Overnight shifts bring out strange behavior, sure, but usually the bizarre customers mumble to themselves, or wander the aisles talking nonsense. This man wasn't wandering. He wasn't confused. He knew exactly where he was and exactly who he was talking to. "I think you have the wrong person," I said, keeping my voice steady. He didn't move, didn't blink. That unsettling smile stayed frozen on his face. He lifted his hand, slowly, and pointed directly at my chest. "No," he whispered. "I know you." My legs felt like rubber. I stepped back again, bumping into a display shelf behind me. Makeup brushes clattered to the floor, but I didn't dare look away from him. "Sir, you need to leave the aisle," I said, trying to sound authoritative. "If you need help, I can call someone." His smile widened. And that's when I noticed something that made every hair on my arm stand up. He wasn't breathing at all. No rise of the chest, no sound of inhaling, just total, unnatural stillness. Then, in one sudden jerking motion, he turned his head to the right, toward the security camera mounted at the end of the aisle. Not his body, just his head. Like his neck snapped sideways, his face tilted up toward the camera lens, that horrible grin frozen in place. I watched him do it, stunned into silence. What kind of person moves like that? Then he looked back at me without moving his head back to center. His eyes shifted sideways, in their sockets, locking onto mine while his head remained twisted toward the camera. My voice cracked as I said, "I'm calling security." That's when he finally spoke again. "They already know I'm here," he whispered. "They're watching us," and he pointed upward toward the camera again. This time his arm jerked, like the motion wasn't fully under his control. I backed out of the aisle, keeping my eyes on him, but he didn't follow. He just watched me retreat, still smiling. I hurried straight to the front, where our overnight security guard, Mike, was sitting by the entrance. He'd worked there for years. Big guy, former sheriff's deputy. Nothing rattled him. I rushed up to him and said, "There's a guy in cosmetics acting really creepy. He followed me down the aisle and said he knows me." Mike lifted an eyebrow. "Is he threatening you?" "Not yet," I said, "but something's wrong with him." Mike sighed like he'd heard this 1,000 times. "All right, show me." We walked back toward aisle 23, but when we got there, the man was gone. The aisle was empty. The air felt cold, though, like he had just been standing there seconds ago. Mike scanned the shelves, the corners, even the floor. "You sure you're not spooking yourself?" he asked. "Long nights make people imagine stuff." "No," I insisted. "I talked to him. He said he knew me." Mike shrugged and said he'd check the cameras. I followed him to the security office. The CCTV room always creeped me out, just a wall of grainy monitors showing every corner of the store. Mike rewound the footage to a few minutes earlier. The playback showed the aisle, empty, then suddenly, there he was. The man stepped into view from the left side of the screen without walking into frame. One frame empty. Next frame, he appeared, like he'd just materialized inside the aisle. Mike paused the footage. "That's weird," he muttered. He pressed play again. The man stood at the end of the aisle, smiling, just like I saw. Then he lifted his head toward the camera, too fast, too sharp. "What the hell?" Mike whispered. But then the footage got worse. The screen flickered, the image warped, and for 3 frames, 3 horrifying, crystal-clear frames, his face changed. His grin stretched wider, his skin looked wrong, loose around his jaw, and his eyes rolled white. Then the feed cut out completely, replaced by static. Mike stared at the monitor, stunned. "Okay," he said slowly. "You weren't imagining things. Mike tried rebooting the camera feed, tapping keys and switching inputs, but nothing brought back aisle 23's footage. It was the only camera offline. All the others worked perfectly. "Must be a loose wire," he muttered, but I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. Before either of us could process what we saw, the walkie-talkie on Mike's belt crackled loudly with static, so loud both of us flinched. Then, a voice came through. A whisper. The same whisper I heard in the aisle. "I know you." Mike froze. "Who the hell was that?" I shook my head. "That was him." Mike grabbed his flashlight and motioned for me to follow. "Stay behind me. If he's messing with equipment or trying to scare employees, he's out." We walked quickly through the store, checking aisles one by one. Nothing. Electronics empty. Clothing empty. Toys empty. As we passed housewares, we both heard it. A soft tapping sound coming from several aisles over. Tap, 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 slow, deliberate. "Overnights," Mike whispered. "Always the weirdest crap," but his joke fell flat. He tightened his grip on the flashlight and moved toward the sound. The tapping stopped the moment we turned into aisle 19. It was empty, until something slid across the floor near the end of the aisle. A small object. Mike approached cautiously and picked it up. It was a name tag. My name tag. The one I had clipped to my vest. Except I still had mine on. I looked down to check, and yes, my name tag was still attached. "How did he get one with my name?" he whispered. Mike's jaw clenched. "He's been here before," he said. "Maybe he stole an old badge." But the tag in his hand wasn't old. It wasn't faded. It wasn't cracked or scratched like reused ones. It looked brand new, identical to the tag I was wearing. Mike pocketed it. "All right," he said, his voice low. "This guy's not just some creep. He's playing a game." And as if responding to his words, the store intercom crackled to life. But no announcement followed. Only breathing. Slow, wet, wrong. And after 5 long seconds, the same whisper filled the entire store. "I know you." The intercom cut off so abruptly that the silence afterward felt loud. Mike and I stared at each other for a moment, both of us trying to process what the hell we just heard. The breathing, the whisper, none of it made sense. "We're sweeping the store," Mike finally said, pulling out his walkie. "Lock the front, nobody leaves, nobody enters. We find this guy." He tried radioing the 2 other overnight employees, Jenna and Luis, but neither responded. More static. Nothing else. That made my stomach drop. The store felt too big, too empty, too still. As we moved down the main aisle, every fluorescent light above us buzzed louder, almost like the whole building was holding its breath. Mike stopped and pointed his flashlight down aisle 5, the paper goods aisle. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. I hadn't, but then I did. A dragging sound. Slow, uneven, something heavy being pulled along the floor. Mike motioned for me to stay back as he moved in, flashlight beam cutting through the aisle. My pulse thudded in my ears. I took a few steps behind him, heart pounding. When the beam hit the floor, my breath caught in my throat. A long smear streaked across the tile. Dark, muddy, and wet. It led all the way down to the end of the aisle, turning sharply into receiving. "Footprints," Mike muttered. The prints were smeared, like someone had walked with soaked, filthy shoes. I recognized the pattern. The mud around the ankles. It was him, the man in the hoodie. We followed the trail into receiving. The big metal doors leading to the stockroom were slightly open, the emergency lights inside flickering. Mike pushed the doors all the way open. "Luis? Jenna?" he called out. No answer. The dragging sound returned, this time echoing deeper inside the stock area. Mike clenched his jaw. "Stay close. If he jumps out, run to the front and call 911. I swallowed hard, nodding. The air in receiving felt colder, heavier, like something was waiting for us, watching us. And as we moved deeper in, the dragging noise suddenly stopped, replaced by something far worse, a whisper directly behind us. "I'm right here." I froze in place, my stomach nodding as the words echoed through the cavernous stockroom. Mike gripped my arm, trying to keep me moving, but I couldn't take my eyes off the shadow, shifting at the far end of the room. It didn't move like a human. Its shape stretched and wobbled as if it were bending the light around it. The dragging noise had returned, closer now, but I couldn't see anything making it. Mike shone his flashlight in every direction, his beam cutting through the darkness, but the aisle remained empty. Then, without warning, something slammed into the shelving behind us, rattling boxes of detergent and causing a cascade of products to spill onto the floor. The sound was deafening in the empty stockroom. I jumped back and tripped over a pallet jack, scraping my knee against the tile. Mike swore under his breath, grabbing my shoulder to pull me upright. "Don't stop moving," he hissed. We edged toward the far door that led to the emergency exit, every sense on high alert. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Fast. Soft, but unmistakably human, yet impossibly quiet. They weren't coming toward us, they were circling. Mike shined the light toward the noise, and the beam landed on something that made my blood run cold. The man in the gray hoodie, standing on top of the shelving, crouched unnaturally, like a cat, looking down at us. His grin was wider than ever, stretched almost impossibly across his face. His eyes didn't blink. He tilted his head, tilting his body unnaturally in the process, and whispered again, "I see you." I tried to scream, but only a strangled sound came out. Mike bolted toward the exit, dragging me along, and the figure leapt down from the shelves, landing without a sound. It wasn't running, it was gliding, moving faster than any human should. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but part of me wanted to look back. I didn't. We reached the emergency door, slammed it open, and bolted into the fluorescent-lit main store, panting. The lights flickered overhead, as though the building itself was reacting to our panic. When we looked back, toward receiving, the aisle was empty. No footprints, no sign of the man, nothing. Just empty. But the dread in the air lingered, like he had never left. And then, from the intercom, that same whisper drifted across the store. "I know you." By this point, every one of us was on edge. The rest of the overnight crew, Jenna and Luis, had gathered near the break room, pale and shaking, whispering among themselves. We explained what had happened, trying to make sense of it. Their faces went pale as soon as they realized we weren't joking. I saw him too," Luis stammered. "A little while ago in aisle 11. I thought I was imagining it." Jenna nodded. "I was stocking cleaning supplies. I turned around and he was standing there, just staring at me." Same grin that confirmed it. This wasn't isolated. The man had been in the store longer than any of us knew, watching, stalking. Mike told us to stay together and keep moving toward the front, keeping an eye on every aisle. The air inside the store had changed. It wasn't just eerie, it felt oppressive, heavy, like the building itself was holding its breath. As we made our way down the main corridor, the fluorescent lights overhead flickered violently, casting long, broken shadows that seemed to twist and reach for us. Every aisle we passed seemed empty. Yet, I felt eyes on me, following, pressing into my back. Then came a sound that froze me solid. A faint scratching, soft, coming from the ceiling tiles above aisle 18. It was rhythmic, deliberate, like fingernails scraping along metal. We stopped. Mike signaled for us to keep moving, but the sound followed, moving as we did, shifting from aisle to aisle. We could feel it. The temperature dropped suddenly, the cold biting into our skin. I turned my head and caught a flash of gray at the end of the electronics aisle, gone in an instant, but unmistakably there. I whispered, "It's him," and the others nodded, wide-eyed. Mike pressed the button on his walkie, calling the store's emergency line. No response, just static. Then the whisper again, soft, deliberate, "I see you." My chest tightened. That's when we realized. This wasn't just a man. This wasn't someone playing a prank. This was something else. Something that could move through the store unseen, stalking us, watching us, whispering our names, knowing exactly who we were. And the worst part? We still had hours until sunrise. And until then, there was nowhere to hide. We stayed close together, forming a tight group as we moved toward the front of the store, the only place that felt even remotely safe. Every shadow seemed to shift as we passed, stretching long and thin across the polished floor. It felt like the whole store was warping around us, like the aisles were bending just slightly in ways they shouldn't. I kept glancing behind us, expecting to see that gray hoodie appear around the corner, but each time there was nothing, just that suffocating feeling of being watched. When we reached the front registers, Mike tried calling 911 again. His phone had no signal. Jenna tried. Same thing. Luis tried. Nothing. All of our batteries were still full, but every phone showed no service. "We need to get outside," Mike said quietly. "Emergency doors will trigger the alarm. Someone should come." "But what if he's waiting out there?" Jenna whispered. Mike shook his head. "He's already in here." He pointed toward the customer service desk. The intercom microphone was lying on the counter, on its side, like someone had used it recently. Fear tightened my chest. I stepped closer. That's when I saw it. A single wet footprint, dark gray, the same muddy pattern from before, right on the tile, and facing us. "Guys," I whispered. Another footprint appeared beside it. Appeared. As in, wasn't there a second ago? No one stepped there. No one moved. But the print slowly bled into existence, as if an invisible foot had pressed down. Jenna screamed. The footprint began moving, one step at a time, toward us, even though nothing was there. Each print formed, darkened, then left a faint smear as the next one appeared. Step, 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 getting closer. "Back," Mike shouted, pulling us behind the registers. But the steps didn't stop. They turned, following the exact path we took seconds earlier, like retracing our movements, like it was studying us. The prints paused just a few feet away from where I stood. Then the whisper drifted through the air, impossibly close to my ear. "I know you, Daniel." Hearing my name, my actual name, nearly dropped me to my knees. The moment I heard my name, the world around me seemed to tilt. My mind raced through every possible explanation. Someone messing with me, someone who somehow learned my name from my badge, but none of it made sense. That whisper hadn't come from a human mouth. It was too close, too cold, too wrong. I stumbled backward, bumping into Luis, who grabbed my arm to steady me. His hands were shaking violently. "We need to go," he whispered. "We need to go now." Mike took the lead, motioning for us to stay low as he guided us toward the grocery exit, the closest one to the parking lot. The emergency alarm would scream the moment we pushed through, but at that point, we welcomed the noise. Anything was better than the suffocating silence swallowing the store. As we crept down the frozen aisle, Something shifted behind us. A single bang echoed, loud, metallic, like someone had slammed their fist against a shelf. Then came another, and another, each bang closer than the last. Mike turned around, flashlight beam slicing down the aisle, and froze. The man in the gray hoodie stood at the end of the row, except he wasn't standing. He was leaning, his body slanted at an impossible 60-degree angle, as if gravity had forgotten him. His head was tilted back, mouth stretched open in a silent scream, his eyes rolled entirely white, but he wasn't moving. It was like he was frozen mid-motion, or stuck between motions. Jenna covered her mouth to stop a sob. Lewis whispered, "What is he?" Mike didn't answer. Instead, he pulled us forward, but as we moved, the figure abruptly snapped upright with a grotesque crack. His head twisted toward us, body jerking like a puppet being yanked by invisible strings. Then he vanished. Not around a corner, not behind a shelf. He simply blinked out of existence, gone in less than a second. A rush of cold air blasted down the aisle, and every light overhead flickered violently. "Run!" Mike yelled. We sprinted toward the grocery doors, hearts pounding, breaths ragged. But when we reached the exit and pushed, nothing happened. The door didn't budge, it was locked. Locked from the outside, and behind us, somewhere deep in the maze of frozen foods, came the unmistakable sound of slow, deliberate footsteps approaching. We slammed against the locked grocery exit, pounding on it with everything we had, our shouts echoing through the empty store. The footsteps behind us grew louder, heavier, yet still impossibly silent in rhythm, like some unnatural predator stalking its prey. I could feel my heart pounding in my throat as the shadow of the gray hoodie appeared just past the end of the frozen foods aisle. He didn't walk, he glided, each movement jerky, mechanical, yet fluid at the same time. Mike shouted something, but his voice cracked in fear. I turned briefly, just long enough to catch that smile again. The grin was wider than any human mouth could stretch. The eyes were pure white, unblinking, unfeeling. And then he whispered, louder this time, "You can't leave. I know you." The sound echoed from everywhere at once, behind, above, even beneath us, though nothing else was there. Suddenly, the overhead lights flickered one last time and went out completely, plunging the store into darkness. The emergency lights cast long, distorted shadows, stretching the aisles into impossibly narrow tunnels. The temperature dropped so fast, my breath fogged in front of me. Jenna screamed, stumbling, and Lewis grabbed her arm. Mike kicked at the door one last time, and finally, with a violent rattle, it swung open. We spilled out into the parking lot, gasping, falling to our knees, shivering uncontrollably. Outside, everything seemed normal. The night quiet, the air calm, the lot empty. But none of us moved to get in our cars. None of us wanted to be alone, even for a second. For the rest of my shift, the man never appeared again. And the CCTV footage, once the cameras came back online, showed no sign he had ever been there. No footprints, no evidence, just the grainy, static-filled frames where his presence had warped reality itself. We called corporate the next day. The cameras were checked, replaced, and deemed fully functional. But Mike, Jenna, Lewis, and I never worked the night shift again. And every time I think about that shift, every time I pass a Walmart after dark, I feel it. The sense of being watched, followed, whispered to by something that isn't supposed to exist. Something that knows you. Something that waits. And I can still hear it sometimes. In the quietest moments, whispering in my mind, "I know you." Story 3. The Stockroom Stalker. I was an overnight stalker at Walmart for almost 3 years, mostly working the back room and overnight unloading shifts. It was late January, bitterly cold outside, and the store itself felt like a different world at night. A quiet, hollowed-out place that seemed to breathe on its own. Most nights were dull, routine. Unpack boxes, organize shelves, sweep floors, and check for misplaced items. But one night, something happened that still haunts me every time I close my eyes. I had just finished stacking a pallet of frozen foods in the stockroom near the back of the store. The fluorescent lights flickered, as they always did when the store's heating kicked on. and I rubbed my eyes thinking it was just fatigue. Then I heard it. A soft, deliberate tapping sound like fingernails lightly drumming on metal. I froze, scanning the room, but there was no one there. I chalked it up to a coworker joking around, or perhaps just an odd echo in the stockroom. The sound came again. Tap, tap, tap. Closer this time. My pulse quickened. I grabbed the flashlight from the shelf, its beam slicing through the dim stockroom. The pallets of frozen foods, detergent boxes, and towering shelves cast enormous shadows, making the room feel larger and emptier than it should have been. And then I saw him. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks. A man crouched behind a stack of pallets at the far end of the stockroom. He was tall, thin, wearing dark clothing, face obscured by a hood. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He just watched me. And somehow, it wasn't his body that was unnerving. It was the way the shadows clung to him, like he was absorbing the light, and the way the silence around him felt heavy, oppressive, unnatural. My stomach knotted. I wanted to call out, but my voice stuck in my throat. I tried the walkie-talkie, but there was only static. And then I heard it again. A whisper, soft, deliberate. I see you. I swallowed hard and forced myself to take a step forward, flashlight trembling in my hands. The man didn't move, didn't blink, just stood or crouched there, silently observing. My mind raced. How had he gotten into the stockroom? All the doors were locked behind the loading dock. Security usually checked every entry point before the overnight shift. I thought about calling Mike, the night guard, but the walkie static earlier told me something was off, almost like someone had tampered with the channels. The tapping noise returned, louder this time, coming from the ceiling above. Tap, tap, tap. It shifted from left to right, moving along the fluorescent lights in an erratic rhythm, as though tracking me. My pulse thundered in my ears. I took another step forward, edging closer to the back of the room, where the figure was crouched behind the pallets. Then it happened. He tilted his head in a way no human should be able to, jerking it sharply to look at me without moving the rest of his body. The air around him seemed colder, heavier. The shadows stretched unnaturally across the floor, crawling toward me, and I could feel every hair on my arm standing on end. My mind screamed at me to leave, to run, but my feet felt like they were cemented to the ground. Then, a sound from behind me made me jump. A shelf of empty boxes crashed to the floor as if someone, or something, had shoved it. I spun, shining the flashlight in every direction. Nothing. Only the faint echo of the tapping from above. My heart hammered, throat dry. And then I heard the whisper again, this time closer, almost in my ear. You can't leave. I froze. The words weren't carried through the air in a normal way. They seemed to resonate inside my skull. Panic surged. My training kicked in. I was supposed to secure the area, find intruders, maintain control. Instead, I took a step back and tripped over a stray pallet jack, sprawling onto the cold tile floor. The flashlight skittered across the floor, landing on the figure. For a split second, the hooded man's face was visible in the beam, and I'll never forget it. A pale, gaunt face, stretched unnaturally wide in a grin, eyes blacker than night, reflecting nothing but the light. Then, just like that, he vanished. I scrambled backward on the tile, trying to get my bearings, heart hammering like a drum in my chest. The flashlight lay several feet away, and I reached for it with trembling hands. When I finally grabbed it, the beam flickered weakly, casting fractured light across the stockroom. Every shadow seemed to pulse, to stretch toward me like fingers. I could feel the weight of his presence, even though I couldn't see him. The tapping noise had stopped, but the silence was worse, thick, heavy, like the air itself had turned solid. Mike's voice crackled faintly over the walkie, breaking through the oppressive stillness. "Daniel, you okay?" I stammered into the mic, my voice barely a whisper. "Yeah, I think so," I replied, trying to sound calm, though my knees were shaking. Mike instructed me to stay put while he came to the stockroom. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me, and tried to steady my breathing. Seconds stretched into minutes. Every creak of the shelves, every hum of the fluorescent lights made me jump. Then, suddenly, the pallets at the back of the room shuddered. Boxes slid slightly, a soft metallic scrape echoing through the empty stockroom. My pulse spiked again. I shined the flashlight in the direction of the sound and froze. The hooded figure had returned, standing perfectly still as if he had materialized out of thin air. But this time, his head tilted in an unnatural angle, far beyond what any human neck could manage. He lifted one hand slowly and pointed at me, all the while grinning that same grotesque, impossible smile. The beam of the flashlight caught his eyes. They weren't reflective, not like normal pupils. They were voids, black, endless, cold. A chill shot through my body, and then the whisper, soft and deliberate, echoed from nowhere and everywhere at once. "I've been waiting." My legs nearly gave out. I wanted to run, to scream, to do anything, but my body refused. The darkness, the cold, and that smile held me in place, paralyzing me. And in that instant, I knew he wasn't just a man trespassing. He was something else, something patient, stalking the nights, feeding on fear, and I was trapped alone with it in the stockroom. I forced myself to move, inching backward toward the stockroom exit while keeping the flashlight trained on the figure. Every step I took felt like wading through thick water, my legs trembling uncontrollably. The closer I got to the door, the heavier the air seemed, like it was pressing against my chest. The figure didn't follow. It stayed perfectly still, its grin never faltering, its eyes never blinking. Then suddenly the tapping began again. So faint at first, I thought I imagined it. Tap, tap, tap. Closer, moving along the shelves as if tracking me. I couldn't bring myself to turn my head. I just focused on the door, willing it to be unlocked, willing it to be my escape. The taps grew louder, sharper, each one echoing through the stockroom in a way that made my teeth chatter. A soft rustling came from the high shelves above, like someone or something was moving along the top. My flashlight flickered violently, the beam swinging across boxes, pallets, and dark corners, finally catching the figure again. It had shifted slightly, its body bent at impossible angles, limbs twisting unnaturally as it remained crouched behind the pallets. The air grew icy, and I could see my breath fog in front of me. I reached the emergency exit door and yanked at the handle. Locked. Of course it was locked. Panic surged. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped the flashlight. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Soft, but deliberate, moving from the back of the stockroom toward me. Not fast, not running, just methodical. Calculated. I turned slightly, just enough to see movement in the shadows of between two pallets. The figure was gliding toward me now. No sound of footsteps, no shifting of boxes, just moving. Its grin stretched impossibly wider, revealing teeth that seemed sharper than humanly possible. It stopped a few feet away, head tilting again, whispering so softly I could barely hear it. "You can't leave. Not yet." Every instinct screamed at me to bolt, but I was rooted to the spot, trapped in fear as the temperature dropped further and the darkness seemed to pulse around me, alive and waiting. I took a shaky step back, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might break through my chest. The figure mirrored my movement perfectly, staying just out of reach, its grin never fading. I realized then that this wasn't a normal person. No one moved like that, not silently, not so fluidly, not in perfect sync with me. Every shadow in the stockroom seemed to lean toward him, stretching like black liquid across the floor and walls. I tried to think rationally, desperately, scouring my mind for any explanation, but logic was useless here. The tapping overhead shifted faster, more urgent, and I could swear it was coming from multiple directions now, from above, behind, and to my side all at once. My breathing became shallow, my stomach knotted with fear. Mike's voice crackled again over the walkie. "Daniel, are you still there?" I shouted back, trying to keep calm. "Yes, he's here. I don't know what he is." There was silence for a moment. Then the voice came again, distorted and low, not through the walkie, but in the room itself. "I've always been here." I jumped, nearly dropping the flashlight. The figure's head twisted again, at an impossible angle, following me without moving the rest of its body. I could feel my hair standing on end. My instincts screamed to run, but I couldn't take my eyes off it. My legs were numb, my muscles frozen. Then I remembered the emergency exit. One step at a time, I forced myself to move toward it. The figure glided forward just enough to maintain distance. I could feel its presence like a shadow pressing against my back. The temperature continued to drop, frost forming on the cold tile beneath me. My chest tightened as I reached for the door handle, praying it would finally open. At the last second, a whisper filled the stockroom, right next to my ear, though nothing was there. "You can't hide, I know you." I yanked the door handle as hard as I could, and to my relief, it gave way. I stumbled through, into the fluorescent-lit main store, panting, sweating despite the cold. I glanced back toward the stockroom. Empty, no figure, no footprints, nothing. But the sense of being watched lingered, thick and suffocating, and I knew deep down he hadn't left. He had merely waited, patient, for the next time I was alone. I slammed the stockroom door shut behind me and staggered into the brightly lit sales floor, my vision swimming as the adrenaline crashed through my system. But even with the buzzing, fluorescent lights overhead and the open space around me, I couldn't shake the feeling that something dark had slipped out with me. Something invisible and clinging to the air like a cold, damp fog. I stood there trembling, my breath coming in ragged bursts, while a couple of night shift associates looked over from the electronics section. "You okay, man?" one of them asked. I opened my mouth to answer, but the words caught in my throat. How was I supposed to explain what I saw? That crooked smile, that impossible movement, that whisper right against my ear. I forced a shaky, "Yeah, I'm fine," even though I knew I sounded anything but. I headed toward the customer service counter, needing to put some distance between myself and the stockroom. Every step I took felt like the shadows were following me, stretching at the edges of the aisles. I tried radioing Mike again, but all I got was static, soft at first, then louder, then layered with something faint underneath. Breathing, slow, wet, ragged breathing. I froze mid-step, gripping the walkie until my knuckles turned white. "Mike? Mike, do you copy?" The breathing grew louder, filling the speaker until it felt like someone was exhaling directly into my hand. Then a voice whispered, distorted and warped like it was coming from underwater. "I know your name." I dropped the walkie on instinct, my heart stopping for a moment. It hit the floor, and the breathing stopped instantly. The store around me seemed untouched. Quiet aisles, humming lights, distant beeps from a self-checkout machine someone was restocking. But I felt eyes on me, behind me, above me, all around me. I forced myself to walk, faster and faster until it was nearly a jog. I was heading back toward the front of the store when one of the overhead lights flickered violently, buzzing like it was struggling to stay on. Then another flickered, then another. One by one, the lights began shutting off, row by row, creeping toward me like a wave of darkness rolling through the aisles. The darkness swallowed the aisles behind me, each light snapping off with a sharp pop that echoed like distant gunshots. I backed away, staring as the store was consumed one section at a time. The darkness wasn't natural. It didn't just fill the space. It moved with purpose, with direction, like something alive was crawling through it. I stumbled into the main walkway near Home Goods, my breath coming faster, the panic rising in my throat. "Is someone messing with the breaker?" I whispered to myself, even though I knew damn well breakers don't shut off lights one by one in a perfect line straight toward a single employee. The final row of lights before me flickered, buzzing so loudly the sound rattled in my skull. Then, pop, pop, pop. The aisle plunged into blackness. I felt it before I saw anything. A shift in the air, a cold push of wind against my back, like someone towering behind me. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. My instincts screamed that if I looked, if I actually locked eyes with whatever was there, I wouldn't walk out of the store. Then something brushed the hood of my jacket. Light, delicate, too soft to be a hand, too slow to be accidental. I bolted. I sprinted down the main aisle, the sound of my shoes slapping the tile mixing with the rapid-fire popping of lights behind me as the darkness chased me toward the front doors. I skidded around a corner, nearly slipping as I reached the bright glow of the produce section, the only area still lit. The contrast was blinding. My eyes watered as I sucked in cold, shaking breaths. For a moment, I thought I was safe. Then I saw it. A shape standing silently between the empty cash registers. Tall, crooked, perfectly still. Its grin bright even in the dim emergency lights. The same figure from the stockroom. Just watching. I blinked once, literally 1 second, and it vanished. Not walked away, not ducked behind anything. Gone. And at the same time, every register scanner in the store beeped at once. The sharp electronic chirp echoing together like a warning siren signaling something had just entered the room. I stumbled toward the customer service desk, my hands trembling so violently I could barely hold the walkie. Mike's voice crackled faintly again, distant but panicked. "Daniel, get to the front doors, now," I ran, my shoes squeaking against the polished tile, eyes darting to every aisle. The store felt alive, shifting around me. Shadows curled and stretched unnaturally, and every sound, every soft thud, every faint rustle, made me flinch. I reached the front of the store and tried the main doors. Locked, I pounded on them, screaming for anyone to help, but nothing. No cars in the lot, no people. Only that oppressive, unnatural silence. Then I felt it. A presence behind me, cold and suffocating, like the air itself had weight. I froze. The whisper came again, low and deliberate. "I'm still here." I could feel its gaze pressing into my back, sharp, unblinking, knowing every nerve in my body was exposed. I glanced at the automatic doors to the side, emergency exit, but that too wouldn't budge. The lights above flickered violently, and in one brief flash, I saw it. There, in the reflection of the glass doors, the figure, crouched impossibly low, head tilted at that grotesque angle, that stretched, unnatural grin staring straight at me. My stomach turned. I spun around to make a run for the storage hallway, the only remaining escape route. But the hallway was empty, just shadows. Too quiet. My heart pounded, mind racing. Where did it go? How did it move so fast? The walkie in my hand squawked static, then silence. Then, a faint dragging sound, like boots in mud, echoed softly behind me. It wasn't fast, it wasn't frantic, just slow, deliberate, methodical, and closing in. I ran blindly toward the customer service counter, knocking over a display of gift cards. The sound of the dragging followed me, echoing in the empty store, always just one step behind, yet somehow in perfect rhythm with my own terrified heartbeat. I glanced back over my shoulder. Nothing. No one. Yet I knew it was there, watching, waiting, patient, and I realized, with gut-deep dread, that whatever this thing was, it didn't need doors, it didn't need windows, it was already inside, and it would always be inside, tracking me. I ducked behind the customer service counter, my breaths shallow and shaky, as I crouched low enough that only the very top of my head was visible above the desk. I clutched the walkie so tightly my fingers ached, listening for anything that would tell me where it was. But the store had gone dead silent. Even the fans in the ceiling seemed to stop. That kind of silence isn't normal in a Walmart. There's always sound. Refrigerators humming, ventilation whooshing, machines clicking on and off. But now, nothing. It was like the building itself was holding its breath. My heartbeat thudded so loud I worried it would give me away. I peeked slowly through a gap in the counter. At first, the front of the store looked empty. No movement, no shape, no crooked figure waiting for me. So I forced myself to rise slightly, squinting down the main aisle. And then, my stomach dropped. There, right at the edge of the light's reach, was a hand, long thin fingers curled around the frame of an end cap. Completely still, completely silent. Slowly, painfully slowly. The hand slid back behind the shelf, as if it knew I was watching. I sank down instantly, nearly choking on the panic. I squeezed my eyes shut, forcing myself not to cry. The dragging sound began again, quieter this time, like it was trying to move without detection. It circled somewhere near the self-checkout lanes. Something metal clattered. maybe a dropped scanner, and I flinched so hard I hit my head on the underside of the desk. The lights flickered overhead. Once, twice. On the third flicker, the intercom above me let out a burst of sharp static. Then, in a slow, glitching distortion that made my skin crawl, I heard my name echo through the speakers. Dan, Eel. My blood turned to ice. The voice wasn't human. It was warped, stretched, wrong, like it was trying to mimic the sound of speech. I pressed my back against the counter, gripping the walkie with trembling hands. I needed to move. I needed to run. I couldn't stay trapped in that spot another second. But before I could decide which direction to go next, something tapped the counter from the other side. Once, then twice, then a third, slow tap, perfectly in rhythm with my heartbeat. And I realized it had found me. I bolted from behind the counter, adrenaline surging as I ran toward the main entrance doors, praying they would finally open. My hands rattled to the push bars, and with a violent shove, the doors gave way. I spilled out into the parking lot, gasping for air, the freezing night wind biting my skin, as if the world outside had no mercy for me either. I glanced back toward the darkened store, half expecting to see the hooded figure following, gliding across the tiles like some unnatural predator. But the store appeared empty, silent, normal, yet I could still feel it, the lingering presence, like a shadow wrapped around me, cold and patient. I ran to my car, fumbling with the keys, shaking uncontrollably, finally slamming the door shut and locking it behind me. I sat there for a long time, chest heaving, sweat chilling on my skin. Nothing moved outside, no lights flickered, no doors opened. But every time I closed my eyes, I could see that crooked grin, those impossible eyes, that warped, unnatural tilt of the head, staring at me from the stockroom shadows. I called Mike from my cell as soon as I could, explaining everything, trying to make sense of it. He didn't laugh. He didn't question me.